Imagine you're sitting in a stationary car,
Okay.
and your hands are gripping the steering wheel so hard your knuckles are literally turning white. I mean, your jaw is clenched, you're sweating, and you're desperately trying to steer a completely different car that is driving down the street outside your window.
Which is, a hilarious image. It sounds completely absurd.
It sounds like absolute madness, but neurologically speaking, psychologically speaking, that is exactly what you are doing every single time you try to micromanage the chaos of your day while completely ignoring the chaos inside your own head.
Right. You're trying to steer the wrong car.
Exactly. You look at your calendar and you see this mess of meetings, looming deadlines, an inbox that just never stops refilling, and personal obligations piling up. And you fall for the ultimate trap.
They all do it.
You think to yourself, if I just organize this perfectly, if I just color code my schedule, manage my coworkers a little better, or honestly, just try harder, all this stress is going to vanish. You convince yourself that your overwhelming anxiety is simply a scheduling issue.
Yeah, we constantly treat our internal state as like a math problem that can be solved by just rearranging external variables.
Right, just move the numbers around.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We operate under this incredibly pervasive illusion that the chaos we feel is originating from the outside world, and therefore the solution must be applied to the outside world. Like, if the pieces on the board are just positioned perfectly, then we will finally be allowed to exhale and feel okay.
But the material we are unpacking in today's deep dive completely dismantles that approach.
It really does. It's a fundamental teardown of how we operate.
We're looking at a profound realization about where human stability actually comes from. The core insight here is that trying to build a stable, peaceful life by relentlessly managing the external world while leaving your internal reactions, your impulses, completely unchecked, is a fundamentally flawed strategy.
It's the equivalent of trying to build a beautiful, structurally sound house on top of shifting quicksand.
Wow, yeah. Quicksand.
I mean, no matter how nice the house looks on the outside, the foundation is doomed.
So that is the mission for today. That's the mystery we are trying to solve. Why is it that the harder we try to control our lives, the more out of control we actually feel?
It's a great question.
We are diving deep into this realization that true control over your life, the kind of control that actually lets you sleep at night, does not come from bending the world to your will. It comes from mastering your inner responses to a world that will, frankly, always refuse to be bent.
And we are going to explore the mechanics of this step by step. We're looking at how to shift away from that illusion, how to build a mechanism of awareness, handle the absolute chaos of our own thoughts, and eventually how to reach a place of genuine detachment.
It's a total rewiring of how we interact with stress. So let's just unpack this progression.
Yeah, the progression is fascinating because it moves us systematically away from the things we spend, like 90% of our energy trying to control.
For the things we actually can change.
Exactly. The individual who authored the core material we're analyzing shares a realization that feels, honestly, universally relatable.
I certainly related to it.
Right. Because on paper, their life looked entirely fine. They were managing projects, hitting targets, maintaining relationships. The external optics were successful.
But internally.
Internally, the experience of living that life was excruciating. Everything felt noisy, tense, and perpetually unstable.
And they operated under the assumption that if they could just fix their circumstances, like get better financial results or surround themselves with more competent people, the internal noise would finally quiet down.
But the paradox is that the harder they tried to tighten their grip on those external outcomes, the more tense and fragile they became internally.
I think anyone listening to this can vividly relate to that specific feeling. It is that sensation of gripping the steering wheel tighter and tighter, but the car is still sliding on the ice.
Right. Because the chaos outside is rarely the actual problem. It is the chaos inside that breaks us. The material draws a brilliant contrast here.
External control is loud.
It is loud. It is exhausting. It requires constant vigilance, managing other people's perceptions and fighting fires. Internal control, on the other hand, is quiet. It is stable. It doesn't require the world to cooperate.
Let's look at the underlying mechanics of why that external approach fails so spectacularly. It comes down to something the source calls the internal chain.
Yes, the sequence of human behavior.
Right, so it goes like this. Thoughts shape emotions, emotions influence actions, and actions determine results.
And when you look at that chain, the flaw in our normal behavior becomes obvious. Trying to fix your life by obsessing over the results, which is the very last link in the chain, without ever addressing the thoughts and emotions that generated those results is a fool's errand.
It's treating symptoms while completely ignoring the root disease.
Exactly. You stay incredibly busy, you expend massive amounts of metabolic energy, but nothing structurally changes because your foundation is still that quicksand of unmanaged reactions.
Trying to control external circumstances without internal control is basically maximum effort for minimum terrifying results. You are literally fighting reality.
You are demanding that the universe conform to your anxiety.
And the physical toll of that is massive. I mean, it's the tight chest, the disrupted sleep, the constant low-grade hum of
The
dread.
physical exhaustion is real because you are running a cognitive marathon every single day just to maintain an illusion. But here's the pivot point. What happens when you finally stop?
Right. What happens when you accept the terrifying truth that you cannot control other people, you cannot control timing, and you cannot guarantee outcomes?
The immediate reaction is profound discomfort.
Oh, absolutely.
And it is uncomfortable because you suddenly lose the comfort of blame.
Ooh, the comfort of blame. Let's unpack that.
Well, if you can no longer blame the chaotic project or the difficult coworker or the unfair market for your inner turmoil, you're basically left holding the bag. You have to look inward.
But, and I think this is the critical trade-off, while you lose the comfort of blame, you regain your power. Responsibility moves inward, and suddenly, you're no longer a victim of circumstance.
Exactly. Think about your own workload right now if you're listening to this. Two different people can face the exact same external stressor.
Like a massive, unexpected project dumped on their desk at 4 p.m. on a Friday.
Perfect example. Same deadline, same demanding boss, same high stakes. Person A is completely overwhelmed. They become reactive, they snap at their team, their heart rate spikes, and they spend the entire weekend ruminating on the injustice of it all.
Just ruining their family time.
Right. But person B, facing the exact same scenario, remains steady. They assess the timeline, communicate boundaries calmly, and log off at a reasonable hour.
And the difference between person A and person B isn't raw talent. It's not intelligence. And it certainly isn't luck. The difference is entirely their level of inner order.
That scenario highlights a fundamental truth about human suffering. Life wasn't crushing person A. Person A's unmanaged reactions were crushing them.
Because when you accept that the external world is unpredictable and often unfair, you realize that the only variable you can consistently influence is how you show up internally.
The default human question when faced with adversity is, why is this happening to me? Which is a victim's question.
Right.
The shift in mindset we are exploring requires changing that question to, what is the most effective response I can offer right now?
That single shift from victimhood to agency reduces so much unnecessary psychological suffering. But let me push back on this, or at least play devil's advocate for a second.
Sure.
It is very easy for us to sit here and say, just shift your mindset. Just get into the driver's seat of your own mind. But if external control is such a deeply ingrained biological trap, how do we practically establish this internal control?
Right, when the adrenaline is actually pumping.
Exactly. When the box is yelling, how do you actually flip that switch? The material insists it starts with something deceptively simple. Awareness. Just seeing what is happening.
It is deceptive because we all walk around with the arrogant assumption that we are already aware. We think, of course I am aware. I'm awake, aren't I?
But being awake and being aware are two very different things.
Massive difference. Action without awareness is just reaction in disguise. If you cannot see the gears turning in your own mind, you cannot control the machine.
I mean, consider how often we try to manage our outward behavior, trying to act calm, trying to sound professional, without ever observing the underlying thoughts driving that behavior.
It's like trying to change the trajectory of a rocket while being completely blind to its navigation system.
People wake up already anxious about what could go wrong. They check their messages compulsively to soothe that anxiety.
And they spend their entire day being carried downstream by life rather than actually choosing a direction.
The concept of awareness is framed here as active restraint. I really love that phrase, active restraint.
It's a great term. It's a form of highly disciplined attention. It is the conscious choice to watch instead of react, to listen instead of immediately interrupting.
To take a deliberate pause instead of exploding. And let's be honest about the discomfort of that pause. When you first start practicing this, that pause feels terrible.
It feels deeply unnatural.
Because it challenges decades of habitual knee-jerk reflexes where rushing to fix things felt like safety. But that brief, agonizing pause is where everything changes. The pause creates space, and space is what gives you choice.
To understand why that pause is so powerful, we have to look at how awareness alters our neurological relationship with time. In a state of pure reactivity, time feels compressed. Everything is urgent.
Everything is an emergency.
Exactly. The amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, has hijacked the system and it demands immediate action.
Hmm.
But when you introduce awareness, when you enforce that pause, moments literally seem to stretch.
You're forcing the executive functioning part of your brain, the prefrontal cortex, to come online.
You stand still long enough to survey the landscape and choose a deliberate direction instead of just being violently shoved forward by biological impulse.
It transforms these predictable, unconscious struggles, like the fact that you always get defensive when a specific person speaks in a meeting, into manageable choices. You begin to see the trap before your foot steps in it.
Right.
Okay, but let me challenge the practicality of this in high-stakes environments. When I am under severe pressure, pausing feels synonymous with giving up ground. If my inbox is exploding, clients are furious, and my team is waiting for a directive, isn't doing absolutely nothing actively dangerous? Doesn't active restraint just look like freezing in the headlights?
That is the exact fear that keeps people locked in chronic reactivity. It feels dangerous because our brains have been wired to interpret stillness during a crisis as a loss of control.
Right, the evolutionary wiring.
Evolutionarily, if a predator is chasing you, stopping to ponder your internal state gets you killed. So your nervous system is screaming at you to do something, anything. But the environments we operate in today are not the savannah. An angry email is not a lion.
Let's use an analogy to separate awareness from passivity here. Awareness is not standing in a burning building, crossing your arms, doing nothing, and just observing the temperature of the flames as they consume you. That's absurd.
Right.
Awareness is taking the crucial half-second to fight your panic, pull the fire alarm, and locate the nearest exit instead of just running around the hallway screaming and breathing in smoke. You are still taking decisive action, but it's deliberate action born from seeing reality clearly.
Exactly the distinction that matters. The action taken from a place of awareness is precise, whereas the action taken from a place of reactivity is sloppy and usually creates secondary crises.
So the natural question becomes, when we finally manage to take that pause, what exactly are we observing?
We are usually confronted with the absolute relentless, chaotic chatter of our own minds, which leads us into the necessary work of dealing with thoughts. You have to master your thoughts before they master you.
Relentless chatter is almost an understatement, honestly. The sheer volume of noise in the human mind is staggering.
It really is.
One of the most confronting truths to accept is how little control we actually have over the generation of our own thinking. Thoughts just appear. They bubble up automatically, constantly, completely uninvited.
You don't consciously decide to suddenly remember a cringe-worthy thing you said 5 years ago while you were trying to write a report, but the thought arrives anyway.
And the foundational error we make as human beings is assuming that just because a thought has appeared in our head, it must be inherently true or profoundly important.
We treat our minds with entirely too much reverence. The mind does not ask for permission before it speaks. It just throws content at the wall.
The individual in our source material describes the agonizing experience of waking up and having their mind already seriously replaying awkward conversations from the day before.
And catastrophizing about potential problems that might happen next week before their feet had even touched the floor.
They were exhausted before the day even began because their mental machinery never, ever rested.
This is where the material offers a massive paradigm shift. It suggests that a profound change occurs the moment you stop viewing a thought as a verified fact and start viewing it simply as an event.
An occurrence, a piece of weather passing through your brain.
Demoting thoughts from facts to events completely changes your relationship with your own mind. We have to understand what the brain's actual job is.
Right.
The brain is an anticipation machine. Its primary evolutionary function is to generate possibilities to keep you alive, not to accurately determine objective reality.
It exaggerates risks, it replays past mistakes, and it invents terrible future scenarios because it thinks it is protecting you from future pain.
This is what we call survival thinking. But survival thinking is a terrible tool for modern life. It is not the same as clear, rational thinking.
If you let survival thinking run unchecked, it drains your metabolic energy, ruins your mood, and exhausts you, all while convincing you that it's doing you a favor by keeping you prepared.
Let's make this tangible. Treating your thoughts like annoying pop-up ads on a sketchy website.
Oh, I love this analogy.
Right. You are trying to read an article, you are trying to go about your day, and suddenly a massive red pop-up ad appears in your brain screaming, "Your life is falling apart, everyone thinks you're an imposter, click here," to panic.
But when you see a pop-up ad on your computer, you don't immediately assume your computer is broken. You don't read the ad, agree with it, and buy the fake antivirus software.
You recognize it for what it is: spam.
You just notice it, recognize it as an annoyance, and calmly move your cursor to click the little X in the corner. You demote the thought from a terrifying command to just a passing event. You don't have to engage with the spam.
That analogy perfectly illustrates the mechanics of attention. You cannot always stop the pop-ups from appearing, but you have absolute control over whether you click on them.
Mental discipline is fundamentally about choosing where your attention rests.
Attention is the currency of the mind. It is what feeds thoughts. The more attention you give to a catastrophic thought, the stronger, louder, and more realistic it becomes. It is a feedback loop.
But by establishing a habit of constantly questioning your thoughts, asking yourself incredibly simple, grounding questions like, is this a fact or just an assumption my brain is making?
Or is engaging with this thought actually useful to me right now?
You actively withdraw your attention. And when attention is withdrawn, those thoughts naturally wither and weaken. You aren't forcibly suppressing them, which takes energy. You're simply starving them of the attention they need to survive.
But this internal dialogue doesn't just stay in the mind, though. Our thoughts rapidly shape our physical and emotional state.
Harsh, self-critical thoughts create physical tension in the shoulders and neck. Catastrophic, future-tripping thoughts create visceral fear in the stomach.
Which pulls us right back to that internal chain we talked about earlier. Thoughts shape emotions.
So what happens when we inevitably fail to catch the thought in time, and it triggers an intense, overwhelming feeling?
This is where we have to navigate the critical, dangerous gap between emotion and action. Because if those thoughts are left unchecked, they will hijack your behavior.
The transition from thought to emotion is incredibly fast, almost instantaneous.
And there is a major societal misconception we need to dismantle here regarding what it means to be emotionally intelligent or emotionally controlled.
Most people falsely believe that emotional control means suppressing your feelings.
Exactly. They think it means becoming a robot, pasting on a fake smile, and pretending nothing affects you. You push the anger down, you hide the anxiety.
But the reality is that this approach is toxic and unsustainable. Suppression doesn't eliminate the emotion, it merely traps it in the body. It creates immense physiological tension.
Suppressed emotions do not disappear. They wait in the dark, gathering strength, and they inevitably leak out.
They infect your tone of voice, they make your posture rigid, they cause you to be passive-aggressive with your spouse, and they profoundly distort your decision-making.
So if suppression is the wrong move, and the goal isn't to just kill the emotion, what is the actual problem?
The material points out that the emotion itself is never the problem. The problem is the speed of your response to it. The problem is reacting blindly before you have even bothered to understand what it is you are actually feeling.
The speed of response is the variable that ruins lives. There is a critical fractional gap in time between experiencing a feeling and taking an action. Emotion rises, and action instinctively follows.
But it is within that tiny gap that all human freedom and agency lives. The distinction we have to make is between suppression and control.
Suppression creates tension by fighting the emotion. Control creates stability by allowing the emotion to exist without letting it drive the car.
Control is the ability to stay physically and mentally present with the intense feeling without feeding it more catastrophic thoughts, and critically, without immediately acting upon it.
There is a highly practical, almost surprisingly simple tool for this: affect labeling, or simply naming the emotion.
When the wave hits, instead of getting swept away, you speak to yourself internally and say, this is frustration, or my chest is tight, this is fear.
It sounds almost too simple to work, but the act of naming it creates immediate psychological distance. It shifts your perspective. You are no longer a person entirely consumed by frustration. Instead, frustration is simply a temporary physiological state you are observing in this current moment.
You become the sky,
Eh.
and the emotion is just a dark cloud passing through.
The neuroscience behind naming emotions is robust. When you articulate the feeling, you literally shift brain activity away from the emotional centers and into the prefrontal cortex. You force logic into the equation.
What is truly fascinating here is the psychological assertion that emotions do not want to dominate you. They simply want expression. They want to be acknowledged.
When you actually allow yourself to feel frustration, when you name it and validate its presence without immediately trying to fix it or act on it, a remarkable thing happens. The emotion peaks, and then it naturally passes on its own.
It moves through your nervous system and exits.
But when you ignore it, deny it, or suppress it, the emotion intensifies to force you to pay attention. Furthermore, unmanaged emotions are terrible lenses through which to view reality.
Anger severely narrows your cognitive focus, making you miss nuance. Anxiety creates a powerful false sense of urgency, convincing you that a situation is a crisis when it's actually just an inconvenience.
I really want you, the listener, to examine that concept of false urgency in your own life. Think about your professional life. How many times have you fired off a highly defensive email or made a rash decision simply because anxiety was screaming at you that the issue had to be resolved right this very second?
Only to realize the next morning that it wasn't a big deal at all.
Right. Our bodies actually give us warning signs before we make those mistakes. The material highlights physical signals: a suddenly clenched jaw, breathing that becomes shallow and trapped in the top of your chest, a sudden heat in the face.
That is your biological early warning system telling you that an emotion is about to bypass your logic.
Learning to read those physical signals is the prerequisite to emotional regulation. The ability to remain calm is not an innate personality trait that some lucky people are born with and others lack.
It is a practiced, highly refined skill. It is a muscle. And that muscle is built through thousands of tiny, daily repetitions of choosing conscious restraint over unconscious reaction.
Which brings up a truth that completely defies modern corporate culture. Responding slowly or choosing to delay a response entirely is very often the most powerful, dominant move you can make.
We live in a world that demands instant replies on Slack, rapid-fire email responses, and immediate answers in meetings.
But silence is not a sign of weakness or incompetence. Silence is composure. You do not owe an immediate reaction to every emotional trigger or external demand that crosses your desk.
Time is the ultimate clarifier. When you impose a delay, you allow the initial surge of cortisol and adrenaline to metabolize and dissipate.
Something that feels urgently offensive and deeply personal in the heat of the moment often reveals itself to be entirely insignificant or at least manageable 2 hours later.
By practicing this emotional control, you stop leaking precious energy on unnecessary conflicts and dramatic overreactions. You preserve your cognitive bandwidth for the things that actually move the needle in your life.
This is all incredibly empowering. Awareness, demoting thoughts, creating a gap between emotion and action. It all sounds great.
But let's get real. Under the crushing, heavy pressure of a normal, exhausting week, when you are tired and stressed, all of these high-minded psychological concepts will completely collapse if they aren't supported by a rigid structure.
And that brings us to the architectural framework of this entire philosophy: redefining discipline. We have to look at discipline as an act of profound self-respect, rather than a system of punishment.
This requires a massive paradigm shift in how we view the concept of discipline. Most people have a deeply negative association with the word.
They avoid building discipline because they associate it with being punished, with rigid, joyless routines, and with a loss of spontaneity and freedom.
So what do they do instead? They rely on motivation.
Exactly. They wait to feel inspired. They wait for a surge of energy to tackle the hard project, to go to the gym, or to have the difficult conversation.
But relying on motivation is a recipe for instability, because motivation is fundamentally a feeling, and as we just established, feelings are incredibly transient and unreliable.
Motivation is a fair weather friend. It is there when you've had a perfect night of sleep and a cup of coffee, but it vanishes the moment things get hard. Discipline, however, stays. It holds the line.
There is a deeply compelling point here about the psychological damage of relying on motivation. It actively erodes your trust in yourself.
Think about it. When you rely on motivation, you inevitably have days where the motivation doesn't show up. And on those days, you skip the workout, you procrastinate on the project, you break the promise you made to yourself the night before.
Over time, the weight of those broken promises compounds. You subconsciously start to view yourself as unreliable. You doubt your own ability to follow through.
That erosion of self-trust is devastating to internal peace. This is why the material radically redefines discipline. It removes the demand for extreme cinematic intensity and replaces it with the quiet power of reliability.
Discipline is not about torturing yourself. It is about doing the small, necessary, unglamorous things consistently, especially on the days when absolutely no one is watching and you feel zero motivation.
It is getting out of bed when the alarm rings simply because you told yourself you would. It is finishing the last 10% of the task instead of abandoning it.
The definition provided is brilliant. Discipline is self-respect in action.
You are not enforcing discipline because you are flawed or because you need to be punished. You are enforcing it because you deeply value your future self and you refuse to sabotage them.
Self-respect in action, that reframing changes everything. Let's paint a picture to make this mechanism crystal clear. Think of human energy like water. If you just have water pouring out onto flat ground without any boundaries, it spills everywhere. It creates a shallow, chaotic, stagnant swamp. It has no force, no direction, and it eventually evaporates. That is a life without discipline.
Right.
But now, imagine building deep, solid banks for that water. The banks are the structure. They are the discipline. They restrict the water, yes, but that very restriction is what allows the water to pool, to build pressure, and to flow powerfully and freely in one specific, intentional direction. It becomes a river that can carve through rock.
The river analogy beautifully captures the central paradox of this section. True freedom is always built on top of structure, never on the absence of it.
The individual from the source material observed their own behavior and noted a stark contrast.
On days when they abandoned discipline, waking up late, doom scrolling in bed, having no plan, their mind drifted endlessly, their anxiety spiked, and their emotions fluctuated wildly based on whatever emails landed in their inbox. They felt entirely out of control.
But on days grounded in strict discipline, the routines completely eliminated decision fatigue.
Decision fatigue is such a massive hidden drain on our lives. When you have structure, you don't have to negotiate with your own laziness at 6 a.m.
Exactly the point. The metabolic cost of making choices is high. If you have to debate with yourself every single morning, whether you are going to show up, whether you are going to do the hard work, or whether you are going to eat healthy, you are exhausting your prefrontal cortex before you even start the day.
Discipline removes the debate. You don't decide. You just execute the routine.
This absolute predictability in your behavior creates a massive reservoir of internal calm. It eliminates the internal friction and the constant, exhausting self-negotiation. You know you can rely on yourself, which eliminates the anxiety of self-doubt.
So if discipline represents the structure, the solid banks of the river guiding your energy, then focus is the heavy-duty security system required to guard those banks from the chaotic, intrusive outside world.
You can have the best discipline in the world, but if you let anyone walk in and interrupt it, it means nothing. This brings us to the role of focus as the ultimate gatekeeper of your reality.
And this might be the most urgent issue we face in modern society. The philosophy argues that in the contemporary world, people rarely lose control of their lives because they lack willpower or because they are inherently weak. They lose control because they're perpetually, chronically distracted.
The author realized that their root problem wasn't a lack of motivation. It was that their attention was constantly being fractured and pulled in 100 different directions by Slack messages, email notifications, breaking news alerts, and the sheer volume of mental noise generated by modern technology.
The critique of our modern habits here is sharp and uncompromising. Distraction is not painted as a harmless little habit or a momentary lapse in productivity. Distraction is categorized as a literal form of surrender.
Every single time you allow your phone to hijack your attention during a conversation, or every time you switch tabs because a task gets slightly difficult, you are actively giving away authority over your own mind.
You're letting an algorithm or a demanding coworker dictate your reality. Multitasking isn't a superpower. It is a myth that literally destroys your capacity for presence.
We have to zoom out and look at the environment we are operating in. The warning here is stark. Where your attention goes, your power follows. Attention is the mechanism by which we construct our reality.
The human mind is physically incapable of panicking and being completely, entirely present at the exact same moment. Anxiety requires the mind to be scattered, jumping between future worst-case scenarios and past regrets.
Calmness, however, grows exclusively in the soil of deep presence. But we are fighting an incredibly asymmetric war here.
We are trying to maintain focus using raw human willpower against digital environments and corporate cultures that have been engineered by thousands of psychologists to be as addictively distracting as possible. Your environment shapes your focus far more than your willpower ever could.
Let's make this actionable for you listening right now. Take a hard look at your physical and digital workspace. Are you setting yourself up for failure?
Are you relying entirely on your sheer, exhaustible willpower to stay focused on a deep work project while you have your email inbox open on a second monitor, your phone face up and buzzing on your desk, and your smartwatch vibrating on your wrist?
The cognitive science is clear here. Every single time you switch your attention, glancing at an email while trying to write a report, checking a text while listening to your child talk, your brain has to reorient. It drains a measurable amount of cognitive energy.
It erodes your self-control. By 2 p.m., you are exhausted, not because you worked hard, but because you task switched 500 times.
The solution proposed is aggressive reduction. The author found that drastically reducing information consumption, cutting out the 24-hour news cycle, deleting endless social media feeds, silencing non-essential notifications was not just helpful, it was vital for psychological survival.
By ruthlessly reducing the intake of digital noise, you create silence. Silence naturally creates mental space, and space is the prerequisite for clarity.
When your focus is guarded, the fog lifts. Focus acts as a filter, revealing what actually matters. When your attention is scattered, every single notification feels urgent, but absolutely nothing feels meaningful.
Deep focus separates the manufactured false urgency of other people's demands from your own true direction.
We have journeyed through a massive amount of internal rewiring today. We've talked about abandoning the illusion of external control, establishing the firm anchor of awareness, demoting our thoughts, putting a gap between emotion and action, building the banks of discipline, and aggressively guarding our focus.
It is a comprehensive blueprint for internal mastery.
But there is a final boss. There's one last terrifying piece to this puzzle. Because no matter how perfect your internal world is, the external world is still wildly unpredictable.
What happens when you do absolutely everything right? You manage your emotions, you put in the disciplined effort, you maintain perfect focus, and you still fail.
The company goes under, the client chooses someone else, the relationship ends. This leads to the final and unequivocally the hardest principle in this philosophy: detachment.
Detachment is the ultimate test of internal control. This is the practice of completely severing the link between your effort and the final outcome.
The principle states that true control is exclusively about directing your effort, your intentions, and your actions.
Attachment, conversely, is the psychological need for a specific external outcome to occur in order for you to feel safe and okay. The very millisecond your internal peace becomes dependent on how something turns out. Whether you get the promotion, whether the launch is successful, whether someone texts you back, you instantly forfeit control of your inner world.
You hand the keys to your psychological stability over to circumstances and people you cannot fully influence.
I know exactly what the pushback to this is going to be because it is the default human response. People hear the word detachment and they recoil.
Doesn't detaching just mean you are giving up? Doesn't it imply a deep apathy? If I don't care about the outcome, why would I work hard? Doesn't it just mean you stop caring about your life?
It is the most common misunderstanding of the concept. The philosophy is explicitly clear. Detachment is absolutely not indifference. Indifference is not caring at all. Detachment means caring, but caring more intelligently.
It is a sophisticated psychological boundary.
Mhm.
Detachment allows you to pour your absolute best effort into your actions, to invest fully, to love deeply, to work passionately without being emotionally destroyed if the result doesn't match your expectations.
You still care deeply about the work, you still commit to excellence, but you release the agonizing illusion that you possess the power to guarantee the final outcome. You accept that the universe has a vote.
Trying to demand a specific outcome forces you to live entirely in the future, and living in the future is the root cause of profound anxiety. Your mind races ahead of your physical body, desperately trying to forecast problems, manipulate variables, and secure guarantees that do not exist.
Detachment yanks you aggressively back to the present moment, and the present moment is the absolute only place where you have any actual power to take action.
We also have to examine how attachment distorts our relationship with adversity. When you are deeply attached to a specific outcome, it violently narrows your perception.
It makes one single specific path feel like the only acceptable option for your survival or happiness. Consequently, when that specific path is blocked by a failure or an unexpected obstacle, sheer panic sets in because you literally cannot see an alternative.
Detachment, however, restores cognitive flexibility and adaptability. If you are unattached to the specific route, you can easily adjust and pivot. It fundamentally changes the nature of failure.
It turns obstacles into neutral data and feedback, rather than allowing them to become identity-crushing indictments of your self-worth.
This principle of detachment also profoundly alters how we interact with other people. One of the most exhausting forms of attachment is being attached to what other people think of us.
The philosophy notes that other people's opinions of you are merely reflections of their own internal state, their own biases, and their own worldview. They are not objective verdicts on your value.
When you successfully detach from the desperate need for external validation, the agonizing habit of comparison loses its grip on your mind. You finally put down the crushing, unnecessary weight of trying to meticulously manage how everyone else perceives you.
To synthesize the entirety of what we have explored today, this journey represents a complete architectural rebuild of the human psyche. We begin by identifying and abandoning the exhausting, unwinnable war of trying to control the external world.
We replace that with a solid anchor of awareness, teaching ourselves to pause and observe the machinery of our own minds. We practice demoting our thoughts from absolute truths to passing events.
We learn to stretch the gap between feeling an emotion and taking an action, preventing our biology from dominating our destiny. We construct the reliable, steady structure of discipline as a profound act of self-respect.
We guard our mental bandwidth with ruthless, intentional focus. And finally, we learn to release the heavy, anxiety-inducing burden of needing specific outcomes to feel at peace.
When you systematically master your inner world through these mechanisms, the outside world simply loses its grip on your throat. Life does not magically stop being chaotic or unpredictable. The emails will still come, the crises will still happen.
But it stops feeling like a constant existential threat. The chaos becomes something you observe and handle, rather than something you absorb.
And the most deeply comforting promise woven throughout this entire philosophy is that this is not an expectation of perfection. Mastery is not defined as never slipping up. You aren't going to become a Zen monk overnight.
Mastery is not about never getting distracted, never feeling a surge of irrational anger, or never falling back into old habits. Mastery is simply the practiced ability to notice that you have slipped a little bit sooner and the ability to return to your center a little bit faster.
It is an ongoing practice, a daily hygiene, not a permanent static state of enlightenment. You will inevitably have days where the quicksand threatens to pull you back in, where the survival thinking takes over.
But every single time you consciously remember to pause and observe, instead of blindly reacting, you are pouring concrete into that foundation. You are reinforcing the internal structure.
Exactly.
Before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final, provocative thought to take with you into your day. We talked at length about how your internal dialogue shapes your reality and your emotional state. We established that thoughts are just passing events, not facts. So I want you to consider this scenario.
Okay, let's hear it.
If your internal dialogue dictates the quality of your life, what would actually happen if, starting right now, you treated your internal monologue with the exact same strict boundaries, standards, and basic politeness that you would demand from a guest in your home?
Oh, that's a brilliant way to frame it.
Think about it. Will you ever let a guest walk into your living room, sit on your couch, and speak to you the way your unmanaged thoughts do?
Not a chance.
If a guest sat there and relentlessly told you that you were going to fail, that you looked terrible, that your ideas were stupid, and that everyone was secretly judging you, you wouldn't just sit there and agree with them. You would immediately show them the door. You would kick them out. So why on earth do you let your own mind get away with speaking to you like that?
That is a phenomenal way to frame the practical application of active restraint. It turns awareness into an act of self-defense.
As you move forward today, remember the danger of the quicksand. Stop trying to build your peace of mind on the constantly shifting sands of external circumstances, other people's moods, and unpredictable outcomes. You can't control the weather outside, but you can absolutely insulate the house.
Take just one single principle we unpacked today. Maybe it is enforcing that half-second pause before you reply to an email. Maybe it is simply naming the emotion when you feel your chest tighten. Maybe it is committing to 1 hour of ruthless single-tasking focus.
Pick one tool and practice it consistently. Start building your life on solid ground. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll see you next time.